Now let's go back for a minute. Why would Harold go to Normandy? Doesn't seem to make sense. One of the very first panels in the tapestry appears to show us that King Edward is ordering Harold to go to Normandy, which seems odd. The interpretation is that Harold is being sent by Edward to Normandy to confirm the promise that William will get the crown. Now this doesn't make sense either, because Harold is the second man in the kingdom. He's the obvious next king. How is it that Edward is able to get Harold to go to Normandy to promise a thing like this? Did he have the authority? Could he make Harold go? Did he really have the strength to confirm his orders? We don't know. So was he just obeying the king, or was it something else? Was Harold using the opportunity? He was a great opportunist. If Edward had ordered him to go, Harold might have said, well, all right, I'll go. It'll give me a chance to size up the opposition, find out what sort of a man William is, case the joint, get the feel of Normandy. So Harold could be using it for his own purposes. I haven't told you yet. Harold had a couple of relations, a brother and a nephew. When William had visited Normandy in 1051, and Edward had promised him the crown, so they said, hostages were given. It was a regular thing in the Middle Ages. If you had an agreement, a promise, anything like that, one side gave hostages to the other for good behaviour. Obviously, if the partner in the agreement didn't obey, then the hostages get killed. And these two young Saxon hostages have been living in Normandy since 1051. So the suggestion is that Harold went to Normandy to get these two young men back. Why? Obviously, because he was clearing the decks for when the time would come when he would have to defend England against William, because he obviously would. Everybody knew that. These two men were out for the crown, and they were rivals. And clearly some kind of reckoning was going to come somewhere. So was Harold in Normandy simply to try to get these two boys back from being hostages? Was he simply clearing the decks? Or another interpretation, was he not going to Normandy at all? It was quite common in the 11th century for noblemen, those with ships, to travel by sea when the alternative was available. Travel by land was terrible. Roads were awful. Not only awful, they could be dangerous. I mean, there was no police force. There were no traffic alarms or anything like this. Anything could happen on the road. As late as the 18th century, 700 years later, John Wesley, the Methodist preacher, nearly drowned in a pothole on the Great North Road. That gives you some idea of how uncomfortable road travel was. So if you had a chance to travel from one part of Hampshire to Sussex, shall we say, and you had the chance of travelling by sea, you travel by sea. Much easier. And Harold, he was the Earl of Wessex. He had access to seaports all round Hampshire and Sussex. It makes perfect sense that Harold was on a boat trip. And another thing that gives you that impression too, the third or fourth panel in the Bayeux Tapestry shows you Harold leaving the king. But he's not just riding away. He has hounds and falcons with him. Now, if you're going to travel to Normandy on an embassy, do you normally take falcons and hounds with? The suggestion is that Harold was simply on a hunting expedition, went on board ship to go somewhere else hunting, and there was a storm. The English Channel is not noted for its similarity to a mill pond. Storms are quite frequent. Harold could simply have been caught. And when you're caught in a westerly storm, most of them were westerly, ships in the 11th century were so poorly constructed that there was no way they could sail against the wind. So the only alternative, if you were hit by a westerly gale, was to go in front of it, up the channel, until you got tipped onto the shore at the mouth of the River Somme, as Harold was. Once again, of course, we don't know. Many historians have asked why Harold took the chance of going to, assuming he did go into Normandy by intent. Why? It seemed a very risky thing to do. He was one claimant to the English throne. William was another claimant to the English throne. Did it make sense for one claimant to put himself under the roof of, at the mercy of, the other claimant? Was it not simply asking, begging for trouble? We don't know. We know that Edward was childless. We know that the throne was going to be vacant. Everybody knew that the atmosphere was becoming more and more electric. Nothing was actually said, but everybody knew.